I stood frozen in the doorway, the chill of the marble floor seeping through my combat boots, as her eyes widened in disbelief. "Marina?" The voice hit me like a physical blow, a mixture of astonishment and recognition. I could feel my heart thundering in my chest, the rhythm almost drowning out the clanging chaos of the gala outside. At 37, I should be used to surprises. I've survived classified operations in the U.S. Marine Corps as a first lieutenant, after all, but this? This was something completely different. The trajectory of my life had shifted in an instant, and all I could think was how the weight of this moment felt like a hand gripping my throat, squeezing tighter with each anxiety-laden breath. There she was, my husband's lover, wearing a dress that clung tightly to her every curve, radiating confidence. It was the kind of dress I could never pull off. The swish of silk and laughter of attendees faded as I clenched my jaw, a mix of humiliation and rage surging through my veins. Just a week ago, I'd inherited $15 million, a windfall that felt as unreal as the betrayal I now faced. I'd thought experiencing brutal gunfire in combat zones had prepared me for all possible emotional warfare, but nothing compared to the devastation brewing inside me at that moment. Her stunned expression said it all. She didn't expect to see me here, confronting the wreckage of my life while the world celebrated around us. I took a step forward, my military training fighting against the urge to retreat. The glint of expensive jewelry and laughter washing over me felt like a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling in my gut. "What are you doing here?" I managed to utter, the words tasting bitter as they left my lips. The thought of Tim, my husband, made my fingers twitch with pent-up frustration. I had known that our marriage had its fractures, especially after serving multiple deployments, but to witness its complete unraveling in front of an audience made my skin crawl. The realization that she had dared to step into my life, my space, felt like a fresh wound being torn open again. As she opened her mouth to respond, perhaps to explain or apologize, I caught a glimpse of sympathy in her blue eyes, the same color as the elegant gown that betrayed me. A part of me wanted to lash out, to scream, but instead, I felt an unexpected swell of calm wash over me. I was a Marine, trained to endure emotional ambushes, yet it felt like this was a battle I hadn't fully anticipated. The chaos of my life was unfolding in slow motion, and as I fought to focus, I could feel the weight of the money, the inheritance that had drawn me into this glittering realm of betrayal and deceit. "Stay away from him," I said firmly, my voice steadying like I was addressing a troop. A flicker of defiance ignited in her eyes, but there was a hint of something else, of fear, perhaps? In a room full of laughter and music, we stood in mutual silence, my heartbeat syncing rhythmically with the pounding bass from the party. I couldn't let her win. I wouldn't allow myself to be just another victim of circumstance. There had been enough sacrifice, enough pain in my life, and if this was a battle for my identity, I would not back down. As I stepped away, preparing to leave this twisted twilight of betrayal behind, I made a silent vow to reclaim my narrative, no matter the cost. Before I go on, subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell the untold stories of military women, courage, sacrifice, and truth. Your support helps more voices like mine be heard. I scanned the horizon, the sun dipping low and casting long shadows over the sprawling estate I had recently inherited. The once grand mansion felt more like a prison than a home, each room echoing with memories that didn't belong to me. I'd always been one to keep my feelings in check, a skill honed over years of military training, but now I felt like a soldier lost in enemy territory. The amount of money I had received was staggering, $15 million. It was meant to provide comfort and security, but all I felt was the weight of impending conflict. When I stepped into that estate for the first time, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the ornate mirror. I looked just as I always had, strong, resolute, my dark hair pulled back into a no-nonsense bun, but the woman staring back wore an expression of apprehension. I was a first lieutenant, trained to handle crises with logic and discipline, yet here I was, navigating an emotional minefield. The sudden wealth was overwhelming, and the choices before me felt as perilous as any battlefield I had faced. What was I supposed to do with this inheritance? Was I supposed to throw lavish parties or donate to charities? Then there was the haunting question of my husband, David. The echo of his absence loomed large in this space, amplified by the realization that he had been carrying on an affair while I was stationed overseas. I didn't begrudge him for seeking solace. We had been apart for too long, and the military life often left loved ones feeling abandoned and lonely. Yet, the moment I confronted the reality of his betrayal, it felt like I had been ambushed in the field, vulnerable and exposed. The rawness of my emotions was something I hadn't prepared for, and the bitterness mingled with an odd sense of liberation I couldn't quite grasp. That day, as I roamed the estate, I crossed paths with Sarah, the woman who had taken my husband's affections. Her appearance was jarring, almost comical in its timing, a sudden presence that jolted me back to my harsh reality. She screamed when she saw me, a noise that sliced through the stillness like a bullet. For a moment, I stood frozen, staring at her in disbelief. I never expected to run into her here, and the irony of it all was almost laughable. Here she was, the other woman, face to face with the wife, both of us entangled in a situation neither of us wanted. What would I say? How could I channel the disciplined Marine within me and confront her? But there was a deeper issue at hand. I didn't want to confront her because I didn't want to confront my own feelings. I felt like I had to fight for my dignity, for my identity, but the battle was one I didn't know how to wage against the very thing that had upended my life. I could feel the pulse of my heart racing, a reminder that the warrior within me was still alive, even if I felt like I was on the verge of defeat. I took a deep breath, summoning the strength I had cultivated over years in uniform, and stepped toward her, ready to face whatever came next. I stood under the harsh fluorescent lights of the interrogation room, the scent of stale coffee and metal barely registering against the roaring in my ears. I felt a strange detachment as I stared at the stack of documents on the table before me, my fingers absently tracing the edge of one. The truth was blaring in all directions, yet I felt like I was grasping at smoke. One moment I was a dedicated Marine, a first lieutenant focused on missions and duty, and the next, I found myself tangled in a web of deceit and betrayal. The air felt thick with something I couldn't quite articulate, maybe it was fear, maybe regret, but it hit me harder than any enemy fire I'd faced. Then, unexpectedly, a crack in the chaos. My assistant, a young corporal named Joe, tossed a file across the table, motioning for me to look at it. It was a photograph, one I'd never expected to see again. It was dated back to my days at OCS, my training days, when ambition and pride still burned brightly in my heart. There she was, a small smile gracing her lips amidst a group of us, arms slung around shoulders, our camaraderie palpable. But the smile that gripped me now felt like a vice around my chest. It was her. The woman who had come to symbolize the life I thought I built, a perfect reflection of everything I wanted, everything I lost. As memories washed over me like a tide, I found myself back in the summer haze of those days, surrounded by the clamor of laughter and the thrill of breaking boundaries. We were young and fierce, all of us, women pushing against the grain, believing that the core was our ultimate proving ground. But it was in those fleeting moments of joy that I had also fallen for a different kind of battle, the quiet, insidious war of love and heartbreak that I thought I had left behind when I chose my career over a certain vulnerable entanglement. The picture felt like a double-edged sword, a reminder that while I had risen through the ranks, the war behind my heart was every bit as real. In that instant, I understood why she had shrieked when she saw me, the air transforming, her face paling as if she recognized the dormant tension that had always been there. I had long buried those feelings, convinced that ambition should eclipse everything else. Yet here I was, thrust back into the arena of emotional conflict, the battlefield now colored with my husband's betrayal and his lover standing wreathed in spiteful disbelief. How precarious my life had become, shifting from one operation to another, dodging not just bullets but the very essence of my own happiness. I resolved to push through the haze, to sift through the emotional debris that surrounded me. As a Marine, I was trained to compartmentalize, to focus on the task at hand, and that's what I would do now. The memories, however bittersweet, would not deter me. I had a mission, to dissect the situation, to reclaim the control I'd lost, and to march forward. They hadn't taken my strength, just disrupted it for a moment. I squared my shoulders, steeling myself against the storm of emotions. I would come out of this, as I always had before, unyielding and resolute. After all, it's how I'd survived until now. I stood in the doorway of my childhood home, the wood stained with the memories of neglect and hurt. The scent of dust mingled with old varnish, lingering like a ghost that refused to leave. My fingers traced the familiar cracked frame of the entryway as I stepped inside, pausing to absorb the silence that had enveloped the place since my mother had passed. It felt surreal to be back, a first lieutenant in the Marine Corps, looking at the remnants of a past I had fought so hard to escape. Memories surged, uninvited and relentless, as I recalled the family gatherings that devolved into shouting matches, the laughter abruptly cut short by the echo of clashing voices. My father's anger had always loomed large, a thundercloud ready to unleash its wrath. He'd been a man forged in the fires of his own childhood, a product of a broken home that had left him scarred and bitter. I remembered the nights I would squeeze my eyes shut, hoping against hope that I could block out the sound of his yelling, the rattle of dishes being thrown in fits of rage. It wasn't until the day I left for boot camp that I realized I had finally broken free from that oppressive weight. But now, that weight had returned, dragging behind it an ache I thought I had buried. As I glanced around, I found myself questioning the very things I had accepted without hesitation. Was it the military that had given me strength, or had it merely become a shield to protect me from the wounds of my upbringing? Returning here, my heart weighed heavy with the unresolved conflicts that had shaped my life. My mother had been the quiet peacekeeper, always urging my father to temper his outbursts, a soothing balm for our turbulent home. I wished she could have seen me, how I had evolved into someone who could not only handle conflict but thrive in it. In the Marines, I had learned to face adversity head-on, a stark contrast to the terrified girl who once cowered in the corners of this house. Yet, I wondered what kind of woman I'd have been had I grown up in a different environment, one where love wasn't conditional and resentment didn't seep through the walls. I returned to the kitchen, where the faded yellow wallpaper seemed to whisper secrets of its own. I had taken pride in cooking for my father, attempting to mend what was broken with the very meals that had once fueled our arguments. Now, standing here, I could almost hear him barking orders like a drill sergeant, demanding perfection in a household where nothing felt perfect. The irony struck me hard. I had entered a world of discipline and camaraderie as a Marine, yet the chaos of my home had been its own brand of boot camp, challenging me in ways I never could have imagined. My thoughts turned to Liam, my husband, and the tangled mess of loyalty and betrayal. Would the demons of my past continue to haunt me, particularly now that I was faced with the reality of his infidelity? As I stood in that kitchen, I realized it was not just the outcome of my upbringing that had shaped my life but also how I chose to confront it. I could feel the stirrings of anger mixed with determination bubbling to the surface. No longer the scared girl from a fractured home, I was a soldier, battle-worn, but never broken. Facing my father's legacy was not about carrying the weight of his mistakes, it was about transforming that weight into strength. I had survived military operations, and now, I would survive the emotional ones. Breathing deeply, I resolved to honor my past by forging a future for myself that was entirely my own, free from the ghosts that had lingered for far too long. The air was heavy with anticipation as I stepped into the dimly lit conference room, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead mixing with the low chatter of my peers. It was my first official meeting as a first lieutenant, my first real chance to showcase my capabilities to the higher-ups. A week had passed since I inherited a fortune that had turned my life upside down, but here, in my military uniform, my worth was defined by something far more tangible. The stakes felt higher than ever. I took a deep breath, silencing the nagging doubts that had crept in since I received that unexpected windfall. This was where I belonged, I reminded myself. As I glanced around the room, I could see the subtle exchanges of glances among the officers present. The whispers faded, but I could feel their eyes on me, dissecting my every move. I was acutely aware of the recent chaos that had unfolded, not just in my personal life, but in every aspect of my existence. I was a Marine first, My rank didn't change the fact that I was still a woman in a world that often measured worth in more traditional, monetary ways. I straightened my spine, reminding myself that my value wasn't defined by my recent inheritance, but by my training, my dedication, and the years of sacrifice that had led me here. The agenda was filled with discussions on tactical strategies and operational plans, yet my mind drifted to climbing the ranks and proving myself. I hadn't earned my title for nothing. Despite the menial comments from some of the old guard about my recent fortune, I had to show them the fierce determination that had propelled me through boot camp and beyond. I knew my worth wasn't just skin deep. I had fought through countless physical and mental challenges to reach this point. My memories of those grueling training sessions rushed back, early mornings filled with sweat, pain, and an unshakable sense of purpose. Those were the moments that shaped me, not the money that had landed in my lap. As I stood to present my ideas, I felt adrenaline coursing through my veins. The projection screen flickered to life behind me, displaying my carefully crafted slides outlining a new operational strategy. I could feel my heart pounding, every heartbeat a reminder of how far I had come from the insecurities of my past. As I spoke, I noticed a few nods of approval from seasoned officers. Perhaps it was the passion in my voice or the clarity of my thoughts that resonated with them, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I sensed respect flowing in my direction. I wasn't just the inherited money woman anymore, I was a Marine earning my place, one word at a time. When the meeting wrapped up and I received genuine feedback rather than dismissive critiques, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had entered with a defensive mindset, but I was leaving with a sense of accomplishment that rippled through me. I stepped out into the bustling hallway, where the familiar smell of coffee and paper filled the air, and for the first time in recent memory, I felt like I belonged again, like I was finally being seen for who I truly was, a first lieutenant forging her path. As I walked away, I realized that my journey had just begun, but if I could survive classified operations, I could certainly conquer this new chapter of my life. My worth was no longer up for debate, it was firmly within my grasp. I stood in the middle of the room, adrenaline thrumming beneath my skin. I could still hear the echo of my husband's lover's scream ringing in my ears, a piercing reminder of the chaos I had just stepped into. The weight of my uniform felt heavier than usual as I surveyed the luxurious living room, decorated with hints of a life that was supposed to be ours. My thoughts were a raging torrent, a mix of betrayal and disbelief, but deep down, a different emotion started to rise, a fierce determination. I was no stranger to overcoming adversity, and this was just another battle, albeit a deeply personal one. I grabbed my phone, fingers trembling as I dialed the number I had memorized from my time in the Corps. I needed to talk to someone who understood the stakes, someone who would ground me in the midst of this unimaginable storm. As the call connected, I could hear the familiar voice on the other end, calm and steady, just what I needed. I filled him in on the situation, the threats that lingered, and the chaos unfolding around me, all while trying to keep my voice steady. My military training kicked in, allowing me to compartmentalize the emotional turmoil, focusing instead on the mission at hand, regain control over my life and make sense of the chaos. While we spoke, I could feel the resolve building within me. The trail had knocked me down, but I refused to stay on the ground. I recalled the countless missions I had been a part of, standing shoulder to shoulder with my fellow Marines, facing danger head-on. I had learned that vulnerability was not a weakness but a strength, a fuel for the fire within. As I hung up the phone, I took a moment to breathe, the sound of the silence wrapping around me like a familiar cloak. It was a moment to absorb everything, the shock, the pain, and the undeniable fact that I had the power to reclaim my narrative. In the following days, I leaned into that power, drawing on my training and the support network of my brothers and sisters in arms. I reached out to those who had been through similar trials, seeking advice and wisdom. Their experiences gave me perspective, each story a testament to resilience, a reminder that I was not alone in this fight. I spent hours organizing my assets, speaking with lawyers, and strategizing my next steps. The thought of the $15 million inheritance, a symbol of freedom, sat heavy on my shoulders, but it also became a beacon of hope. With each decision I made, I felt more in control, more aligned with the fierce woman I had been molded into through years of service. As I walked through the front door of the marital home one last time, I felt the weight of my past behind me. It was time to confront my husband, to hold him accountable for the choices he made, choices that had shattered the foundation of our life. The confrontation was intense, filled with raw honesty and emotion. I shared my truth, my heartbreak, and the strength I had found in myself. I wasn't just a victim in his story, I was reclaiming my role as the protagonist of my own life. By the time I walked away from that conversation, I realized that I had faced one of my greatest fears and emerged not just intact, but stronger. It was in that moment of vulnerability, standing tall in my authority, that I fully embraced the woman I had become. The scars of betrayal would always be there, but they now served as reminders of my strength, the determination that had carried me through every challenge. I was First Lieutenant Marina, a veteran of the most demanding battlefields, now completing one of the most significant missions of all, rebuilding my life and emerging from the ashes, ready to embrace the unknown that awaited me. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows as I stood in front of our old family home, the one my parents had poured their hearts and sweat into. It had seen better days, much like me. I'd thought I could come back here, that it would feel like the sanctuary I remembered. Instead, the peeling paint and overgrown weeds echoed the chaos that had become my life. The weight of the inheritance, the sudden wealth pressing down on me, felt less like a blessing and more like a shackle. Every day was a battle as I tried to untangle my emotions while keeping my head above water. But there's a truth I learned in the core: persistence is everything. In the midst of all this turmoil, I joined a local community garden project. It felt so far removed from the intensity of my military duties, yet the act of digging my hands into the dirt became a form of therapy. With each seed I planted, I found a small piece of control in a world that felt like it was spiraling out of my grasp. My fellow volunteers were a mix of retirees, young families, and college students, all of us united by the simple goal of growing something beautiful. I could see resilience reflected in each sprouting seedling, a reminder that life continues to push forward despite the harshest conditions. It was a communal effort, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But change doesn't come easily, and while the garden flourished, I still wrestled with my own feelings. There were moments when I caught myself staring at my reflection, searching for the person I used to be before the betrayal, before the operation that changed everything. The struggle was real. I had been trained to confront the enemy head-on, not to dissect the painful memories of a fractured heart. I remembered my commanding officer's words: "You don't get to quit just because things get tough." With each passing day, I channeled that tenacity into rebuilding not just my life but also my spirit. One morning, while I was watering the plants, I overheard a couple of the volunteers discussing leadership skills. They were talking about the importance of communication and trust, skills I had sharpened over my career. Listening to their conversation sparked something in me. I realized that the core of effective leadership isn't only about authority, it's about fostering relationships, about lifting others as you rise. As I shared snippets from my own experiences, I felt a surge of pride. I had led teams in combat zones, but now, I was leading in a different way, helping others grow alongside me. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I found myself smiling for the first time in ages. The road to healing was still long, but with every small victory, I felt more empowered to reclaim my life, to grow beyond the insecurities and doubts that lingered. The garden was thriving, and so was I. I understood now that persistence wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving, about learning to embrace both the struggle and the beauty that life has to offer. Each day was a testament to resilience. I was still here, still fighting, and more importantly, still growing. The night was thick with tension as I sat alone in the dim glow of my living room, my uniform still crisp from the day's operations. I had expected to feel a sense of relief after the mission, but instead, the weight of silence pressed against me like the heavy pack I carried on my back during training runs. I couldn't shake the memory of the last moments I spent with my husband, Mark, just before everything changed. How could I have known that a single revelation would unravel the life we built together? Every corner of our home echoed with laughter and promises made, but now it felt like a graveyard of memories. I had always considered myself strong, built for the rigors of military life. Yet here I was, alone with my thoughts, revisiting that day. The confrontation with Lily, his lover, felt like stepping into an ambush. As she screamed, her world crumbled just as mine had. I remembered the rage that coursed through my veins, transforming into a chilling numbness when I saw the pity in her eyes. How could it be that I, a first lieutenant trained to face enemies head-on, was brought to my knees by the betrayal of the one person I trusted most? I was supposed to be the unbreakable fortress, but instead, I stood exposed and vulnerable, with walls that had been systematically demolished. In the days that followed, I found myself lost in the very function I had once excelled at. Orders and drills became mere echoes in my mind, overshadowed by the constant replay of Mark's face, the way it morphed from warmth to guilt. I tried to drown it out with physical training, running until my legs burned and my lungs gasped for air, but there was no distance long enough to outrun my thoughts. I didn't want pity. I wanted strength. I wanted to fight back, not just against the pain but against the insidious implications that I was somehow at fault for his choices. I recalled the values we were taught in the Corps, the concepts of loyalty and honor, and felt them slip through my fingers like sand. My world continued to spiral as I faced the logistics of my inheritance, $15 million I had never expected and didn't know how to manage. I had enlisted in the Marine Corps to serve something greater than myself, not to navigate financial windfalls that seemed alien in comparison. The money felt like a hollow victory. I also couldn't shake the lingering suspicion that Mark had some misguided connection to this newfound fortune. Was it a way to compensate for the love he squandered? Or was it a misguided attempt at redemption? I pushed these thoughts into the recesses of my mind, focusing instead on collecting myself and my career. It was my only anchor. As I began to carve out a new path, I faced the very real prospect of letting go of our shared dreams, our vision of the future. I found that I was fighting not just for my heart but for my identity as a Marine, a woman who had faced battlefields and won, yet now couldn't seem to win the war within. In a world that prized resilience, here I was, navigating the tumult of loss, personal loss and an unraveling life where I had been both a leader and a wife. The duality of my existence weighed heavy. I had lost my husband, my trust, and yet, there lay a flicker of hope within me, an ember that reminded me of who I was capable of being. I had always been a survivor, and somehow, I would find my way back to myself again. The morning sunlight filtered through the large windows of the briefing room, a soft glow illuminating the faces of my fellow officers gathered around the long table. I sat at the head, pinned in crisp uniform, my insignia a stark reminder of the weight of my responsibilities. The last few weeks had been challenging, to say the least, and the scars from my recent ordeal still felt fresh, but today was different. Today, we were coming together not just to discuss operations but also to recognize hard work and dedication. As Major Thompson stood to address the room, I felt the weight of my heart in my throat. He nodded toward me, acknowledging my efforts during the last operation that had pushed us all to our limits. Marina has gone above and beyond the call of duty, he began, his voice steady and commanding. Those words were a balm, soothing the doubts that had crept in ever since I'd returned from that mission. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving and earning the respect of those I fought alongside. I looked around, meeting the gazes of my peers, and a sense of pride welled up within me. As I listened to Major Thompson recount the details of our last deployment, my mind drifted to the camaraderie we had built. These were men and women I had shared sleepless nights and terrifying moments with, each of us relying on one another to make it through. My heart swelled when I noticed Sergeant Kim leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, a small smile of respect playing on his lips. He had been one of the toughest critics when I first arrived at our unit, pushing me to prove myself. To see him acknowledge my contributions felt like a silent affirmation of my place here, or rather, my rightful place. When it was my turn to speak, the nervous energy surged through my veins. I cleared my throat, glancing at the familiar faces. "Thank you, everyone," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "Working with each of you on this mission has been one of the greatest honors of my career." The sincerity in my voice surprised even me. I wasn't just playing a part. I truly felt that every harrowing moment and shared laugh had united us as more than just a unit, but as a family. I recalled the moments of vulnerability we had shared, the fears, the doubts, and how they had morphed into something far stronger than I ever could have anticipated. As I finished my speech, a subtle shift in the room caught my attention. There was a new sense of appreciation in their eyes, an understanding that I was not just a rank, but a partner in this fight. I could feel it in the air, the way they leaned in a little closer, eager to build on what we had started. For the first time in a long time, I felt a deep connection, a recognition that went beyond the responsibilities of our roles. They saw me, the woman behind the uniform, the one who had faced fears and fear's shadows. The barriers that had divided us began to crumble, the operation that had once seemed daunting transformed into a testament of unity and respect. As I stepped down from the makeshift podium, the applause erupted, echoing in the room like a heartbeat. I glanced around, catching a few eyes that mirrored my own, full of hope and validation. In that moment, I realized that this recognition was not just about me, it was for everyone in that room who had fought through adversity together. I walked back to my seat feeling lighter, more at home within this armada of resilient warriors. Whatever happened next, I knew I wasn't alone. We were a team, and together, we were unstoppable. I stood at the edge of the property I had inherited, looking out over the sprawling estate that I never thought I would own. The sunlight glinted off the polished surface of the fountain at the center of the garden, but it felt like a cruel distraction from the turmoil boiling inside me. The disappearance of my husband, Daniel, had turned my life upside down, and now, standing here exposed to the world, I felt like I was teetering on the edge of a precipice. I could hear the distant sound of a car approaching, and I braced myself for what was coming. The moment she stepped out, I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. Chloe. My husband's lover. Her smirk was both infuriating and haunting, the way it reminded me of everything I had lost when Daniel chose to betray me. "What brings you here, Chloe?" My voice was steadier than I felt, but I could see the surprise flicker across her face. The last time we'd shared a space, it was under different circumstances, when I had been blissfully unaware of the treachery brewing beneath my own roof. I folded my arms, pushing down the memories of our shared life, dinners, laughter, the little moments that now felt like weapons turned against me. But this wasn't the time to wallow. I had a mission now, a purpose. I needed answers, and my heart hammered in my chest as I took a step closer, refusing to let her complacency intimidate me. "Marina, I didn't expect to see you here." She glanced around, pretending to admire the surroundings, but I saw the flicker of guilt in her eyes. I thought it was all, well, finished. I could almost taste the bitterness in her words, the underlying suggestion that Daniel's disappearance had somehow freed her from the chaos of our lives. My anger swelled, and I felt the years of training kick in, grounding me as I confronted my adversary. "Daniel is missing, and you're here thinking you can reclaim some sense of normalcy?" I snapped, the words spilling out before I could contain them. The moment hung between us like a tension wire, each of us coiled and ready to strike. "Normalcy? I'm not here for that, Marina." Her voice softened, but it didn't reach me. I loved him. I didn't ask for any of this. The words dripped with feigned sincerity, but I wasn't in the business of granting compassion to the woman who had shattered my life. I stepped closer, my training as a first lieutenant propelling me to take control of the situation. "You think you loved him? You think that your love somehow gives you a pass on the pain you've caused? You're mistaken." The distance between us shrank, and I could see her mask of confidence begin to crack. For a brief moment, we were two women torn apart by a single man, but she was the one who had chosen betrayal when all I'd wanted was loyalty. I had a right to know. Her voice rose, and I recognized the tremor of desperation in her tone. "He was going to leave you. The accusation hung in the air, and it stung harder than any bullet I'd faced in combat. My breath hitched, the truth of her words slamming into me like a physical blow. I had fought for him, sacrificed so much, yet standing here was a stark reminder that love sometimes falters under the weight of choices made in shadows. You think losing him is the worst thing that can happen? I leaned in, my voice low and steady. I'm still here. I have to find him. I will fight for him, for the truth. The defiance in my heart blazed, hotter than the sun overhead, and for the first time in months, I felt the sharp clarity of my purpose cutting through the haze of betrayal. I sat in the small conference room, the stark fluorescent lights buzzing softly above me, casting a sterile glow on the faces around the table. As a first lieutenant in the Marine Corps, I had learned to steel myself for the storms of scrutiny that often accompany high-stakes operations. But this was different. This was my life unraveling in public, and the faces that filled the room, my commanding officer, a few grim-faced legal advisors, and a spokesperson from public affairs, were impossible to distance myself from emotionally. The questions I'd anticipated were now looming over me. How had I managed to inherit $15 million? Was my husband's affair really just a sordid detail, or was it the crux of everything that was about to unfold? When I had received the call about my inheritance, I had thought it was a misunderstanding, a sick joke. But here I was, flanked by the specters of my past choices, my marriage teetering on the edge and a relationship with my family that felt frayed and distant. My parents were appalled. They had always envisioned me in uniform, a dedicated Marine serving my country, but now, with this unexpected windfall, I was suddenly thrust into the spotlight as if I had become a celebrity overnight. They couldn't understand how I could. Their daughter, who had always lived by a strict moral code, had now inherited a sum that cast shadows on everything I had stood for. As the conversation turned to my husband's lover, a tight knot formed in my stomach. I had been there when she burst into the gala, her eyes wide and wild, a desperate chaos that felt almost surreal. The way she screamed at me felt like a piece of shrapnel embedding itself in my heart. I hadn't just been battling the betrayal of my husband, I was now in the crosshairs of public admiration and disdain. My uniform, which once filled me with a sense of pride, now felt like a target, one I could not escape. It was a delicate dance of survival, trying to keep command of my emotions, to maintain the image of a leader while inside I felt anything but. My mind raced as I considered the public's reaction. The press was clamoring for a scandal, a juicy narrative that could be hashed out and regurgitated. I could only imagine the headlines: Marine Lieutenant faces personal crisis amid sudden wealth. It felt surreal, as if I were watching someone else's life on a screen. My role as a first lieutenant, my duty to my fellow Marines, now seemed to clash with the expectations of the public yearning to dissect my story. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to remember that I had survived difficult missions before. This was simply a new battlefront, and I would not go down without a fight. As the meeting dragged on, I realized that I had to take control of the narrative. I needed to redefine my identity, not as the distraught wife but as a resilient woman in command. I could almost hear the echoes of my training: stay focused, remain disciplined. My family, my brother who had always been my anchor, would stand by me, and I would prove to them and to myself that I could navigate the murky waters of public opinion. Yes, my marriage was crumbling, and yes, the inheritance had opened a Pandora's box of complications, but I was still a Marine, and I knew how to fight. This wasn't just about money or betrayal, it was about finding my voice amid chaos, reclaiming my identity, and perhaps, in the process, finding a way to piece my life back together. As I stood on the balcony of my new penthouse, overlooking the sprawling city that never sleeps, I couldn't help but smile. The wind tugged playfully at my hair, much like the freedom I now felt coursing through my veins. Gone were the days of seeking validation from those who laughed at my dreams, brushed off my ambition, and predicted my demise. Those voices, once so powerful in my mind, had faded into whispers, smothered by the roar of my own resilience and the unyielding truth of my worth. I had gone through hell and emerged, not only alive but thriving, and I owe it to the journey that transformed me into the woman I am today. Every scar I carry tells a story, but they are not marks of defeat, they are trophies of survival. Each challenge I faced, from the classified operations that put my life on the line to navigating the treacherous waters of betrayal, shaped me into a fierce protector, not just of my country but of my own honor. I no longer feel the need for anyone else to define my value. I have learned that the strength I possess is not just a product of my training in the Marines, but a flame ignited by my own heart. I am worthy of love, success, and happiness, whether or not it fits into someone else's narrative. The betrayal of my husband was a catastrophic moment, and his lover's scream still echoes in my mind. But instead of allowing that scream to haunt me, I have made it a rallying cry. It was the moment I realized that my existence could no longer be tethered to anyone's expectations but my own. I took the $15 million inheritance and transitioned it into a foundation that supports women who face similar struggles. I want to empower them, show them that we can rise together, rebuild our lives on our own terms, and reforge our identities. As I pave my path, I find comfort in knowing that I am not alone. Our struggles are woven together, creating a tapestry of strength. In this new chapter, I embrace the solitude that once terrified me. There's a beauty in self-sufficiency that I had never recognized before. It's the kind of solitude that fills me with clarity. It's in the quiet moments that I hear my own voice, a voice that has grown stronger with every battle fought. I have learned to trust my instincts and to listen to my heart. The world feels vibrant and full of potential, and I am taking the reins of my life with pride and determination. I am no longer the woman who needed approval, I am the woman who stands in her own light. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I found peace. I took a deep breath, letting the cool evening air fill my lungs. It was in that moment that I realized how far I had come, how far I had fought to be here. I stood tall and resolute, a phoenix rising from the ashes, a testament to my journey and the love I have found for myself. I am not defined by anyone else's opinion, I am defined by my unwavering spirit and the legacy I choose to create. If you stayed with me until the end, thank you. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from.